Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session of the Aging Well series. My name is Kate Budries, and I am the branch manager for the Glen McNary branch of the Greensboro Public Library. On behalf of the Greensboro Public Library and the Greensboro Public Library Foundation, welcome to tonight's program. Thank you to those of you in the audience who contribute to the foundation. It is through your support that we can continue to offer quality programming. In partnership with the community, the Greensboro Public Library strives to provide free and equal access to information, foster lifelong learning, and inspire the joys of reading. We connect and collect. The Greensboro Public Library is your conduit to so many resources. If you don't have a library card, you can stop by your local branch today to get one. They're free. You can visit www.greensborolibrary.org to find a branch near you. Today's program focuses a lot on health and aging, and there's a lot of library databases that are related to health and medical information. You can browse journals and magazines through the Consumer Health Database, the Health and Medical Collection, and the Public Health Database. You can visit Medline Plus for information about medical conditions, treatments, and healthy lifestyles. Or for North Carolina specific information, you can peruse the NC Health Info Database. To learn more, please contact your neighborhood branch or visit the Greensboro Public Library website. Please be aware that this program is being recorded and may be shared on Greensboro Public Library's social media channels, including YouTube. If you do not wish to be recorded, you are welcome to turn off your camera and/or edit your name as displayed in Zoom. Recordings may be edited for length. Please note that recordings and related chat messages are public record subject to North Carolina public record laws and may be disclosed to third parties. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. To avoid any ambient noise or feedback, we ask that you remain muted during this program unless prompted to turn on your microphones. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to answer as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of the session. Thank you all again so much for being here, and now it is my great pleasure to welcome Cheryl Greenberg.
Thank you, Kate. Cheryl, I am Dr. Cheryl Greenberg, the age coach. And I'm going to get me out of the way so I can see the slides. There we go. So welcome to all of you. Some of us have met before. I'm a life coach for seniors and their families. And I work with folks, help them figure things out as they're going through some major life change. For example, they may be downsizing or thinking about retiring, and they might be going through an illness or maybe a dementia in the family or with somebody they're close with and need help with navigating that. In many cases, the folks that I speak with are actually caring for somebody. They are providing care for somebody with whom they are close. And that motivated really this talk tonight because there are so many people in that situation now, and it's a pretty much unmapped territory. We don't go to high school and find out how to be a caregiver 50, 60 years, 40 years later. So tonight, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. I'm going to introduce the idea to you of a transition tripod. There are three big pieces to going through a change with someone for whom you are a caregiver. We'll talk about ways to provide care for other people, and very importantly, and focus on this, we're going to talk about taking care of ourselves when we're providing care. So let's stop for just a minute. Since we can't share too well, at least not until the end of the program, just think about this for yourself. Are you a caregiver? Is there somebody for whom you provide some care or complete care? What's one word that comes to your mind that describes your caregiving activity? And what's one concern you have about caregiving that comes to mind? Let's see if we can answer those questions that you're thinking about. I want to remind you that if you have questions at any time, write them in the chat. I'll try to check on those, and I'll certainly get to them at the end, if not during the presentation. So this transition tripod is something that spoke to me. It seemed to me that there were some major parts to preparing and then putting in place some kind of caregiving and care receiving relationship. There are two people or more in this relationship that is care providing and care receiving, right? The big pieces are, and the big pieces that we need to think about, we need to gather information about, we need to discuss with others. Number one, information and action. What information do we need? What do we need to do? And then resources and support. What's out there that provides another set of hands and ears and even information for us as we take on this care providing role. And a really important one is what emotions rise for both the person who's receiving care and for the care provider over time. Let's start with creating a caring future with the information that we need. There are lots and lots of questions. I'm reminded of the journalist formula: who, what, where, when, why. Who, what, where, when, and why. Let's start with a little bit of the who, the what, the where, and the when. Who are we dealing with? Well, the carees, and I think I made up that word, the people receiving care, can be children. They can be adults with physical disabilities or illnesses. They can be adults with emotional, psychiatric, or cognitive, that's thinking and memory issues. Actually, the people who receive care can be any age. And although we very often think of older adults needing care, we know that, for example, many grandparents are giving care to their grandchildren, as just one other example. The caregivers or the care providers are very, very often members of the family, close relatives, although the people providing care may be professionals who are out in the community, and we'll look at some of those people in just a minute. Now, what are the changes? Why is this caregiving future an issue? Well, let's start with the really comfortable thought, I think, that everybody changes. There are normal physical changes with aging. Actually, every system in our body changes, and really between the years 20 and 40, we begin to see changes like vision, changes in the color of our hair, maybe our reaction time slows down some. We move along a little bit further and we have some aches and pains in our joints. We have to be careful of our heart, our cardiovascular system. There are changes all through the body. Some of the changes are positive. In fact, we know, for example, that people become wiser. We become wiser. Our something called crystallized intelligence, our ability to make plans, problem solve, based on all of our experience, improves over time. So it's not all some downhill slide, but the important part here is that there are changes, some in positive direction, some negative, and they're normal age-related changes. Folks do not need assistance as they age just because of these changes, typically. However, there are also changes that involve what I would call health problems, diseases. Sometimes they're just acute diseases, something comes and goes. The flu that we have, that we're worried about every winter, a cold, pneumonia, those things can come, be treated, and a person typically gets better. But they're acute, which means they come on and need quick attention from physicians, from the medical community. There are some chronic diseases such as emphysema and Parkinson's disease, and even emotional problems like depression, that may be chronic, go on over a long period of time. And then there are what I call critical diseases and conditions that require immediate attention and can be life-threatening. Now, the impact on this in our discussion about a caregiving future is that very often as a person develops a disease, they need some help with what we call activities of daily living. The things that we normally do to stay independent, grooming, being able to dress ourselves, being able to get out of bed and walk to the kitchen and make our own breakfast. When somebody is having trouble with some of those activities of daily living, they need help in order to function well, to stay healthy, and those limitations may require a care provider. They may be small parts of the day that they're needed, they may be longer depending on how many problems there are. There may even be things that keep folks from being independent because they can't drive while they're ill, or there are things going on in their house that they need assistance with. They can't climb a ladder, or they don't have the strength to hammer a nail. We also have normal, normal age-related changes to our brain. I know our brain's part of the body, but we typically talk about it separately from other parts of our body and separately when we talk about health issues. When we talk about brain function, we talk about cognitive changes. And again, there are normal age-related changes. Our brains slow down a little, it takes longer to remember something. We don't require an awful lot of support, maybe some little notes on a pad, reminders in a calendar. But sometimes the ability to remember and to solve problems becomes noticeable to other people and perhaps noticeable to the person. They can still pretty much carry on their activities of daily living, but they have something called mild cognitive impairment. There's a noticeable problem with memory or problem solving, but it's not really a disease. It may become a disease. It takes some more assistance, but not continual assistance. And then there are dementias, and you know that dementias are dementia itself refers to many, many kinds of diseases that impair our ability to think, to problem solve, to make plans, to remember, sometimes to use language, and there are other symptoms. Alzheimer's disease is the one we know the best because 60 to 80% of the people who have a dementia have Alzheimer's disease, but there's vascular dementia, there's Parkinson's related dementia. There are quite a few in the wheelhouse. Now, dementias also impair a person's ability to function. They impair a person's, in this case, memory, thinking, and so forth, so that they can't carry on the activities of daily living without assistance. Depends on which dementia a person has, exactly which functions will suffer, but I've given you some examples of some of the ways in which a person changes if they have a cognitive disability, they have dementia. There's another kind of change that we see, and I don't think we think about it a lot, but over the course of our lives, our relationships change. We lose folks, people die, people move away. We rely on work and volunteer activities and our faith communities, for example, for our relationships in many cases. If for many people, there's less participation in those community work and volunteer activities, and so relationships change. Some people are actually isolated, particularly because of the pandemic, but isolation of older adults is not new. It pre-existed the pandemic. It's been a concern for a long time. So So that's a little bit about what's going on that might cause a change in a person so that they would need some assistance with activities of daily living. Now the why. Why would we enter into a caring relationship, a caregiving relationship with someone? And what does it feel like? Well, let's look at it from the point of view of the caree, the person receiving care. Here's what we know from asking people. People who have some kind of impairment or illness that keeps them from being independent still say they prefer being at home. They see often that when they go into a residential community, that they lose their independence, they lose their privacy, they lose their ability to schedule their own lives. They prefer to stay in a setting where their own things are around them. They can set their own schedule, where things feel comfortable. Maybe in many cases, a person has lived in that same home for 20, 30, 40 or more years. Also, when we're in a caring relationship that we're talking about family caregivers or people who are very close to the person who needs care, who requires care. That caregiver is familiar, and when in a residential community, there are people hired who come and go. They may be lovely, but they're not people who are particularly familiar, and they may change. And they probably do change 3 times a day and each day of the week. They don't know the caree intimately. They don't know what they like, what bothers them, how they feel cold and need than other people and need sweaters, or that they wear their glasses, but they only wear their eyeglasses when they're reading. Staying at home is also less expensive, and the carees like that. There are positives for the caregiver as well. We don't often think about this. I mean, it's a lot of work to provide care. But I personally have found, and many caregivers tell me, and the research shows, that actually there are a lot of advantages for someone who's giving care. Imagine giving care to your parent, for example, an adult giving care to an older adult. This is a chance to get to know the person in some new ways that a mature relationship, not a young child knowing their parent, but mature people knowing each other. They may become closer. Caregivers often report that the opportunity to provide care is like a gift. It's a gift not only that they're giving to somebody else, but it's a gift they're receiving. The opportunity to spend time and to show their love and to really have an appreciative relationship. Of course, we also hear from caregivers that their whole family may grow as a result of the experience. This is a country, and many of the Western countries are the same, where we don't really value older adults or younger people who need care as positively as we might. When you live up close to and personally with folks who need support, we find out their strengths, we find out their needs, we find out what it means to both have a need but also have a lot of quality of life left. Now, that doesn't mean it's all peaches and cream. There are difficult parts about being in a caring relationship. For the caree, there are issues of being dependent on somebody else, of having somebody else have a lot of input into the schedule, into what you eat, into what you wear. There's just a sort of loss of privacy and independence that can be uncomfortable. People sometimes resist having somebody else in their space and in their schedule. And of course, for the caregiver, if you are a caregiver, you know that there are multiple demands on most caregivers. You may have younger children at home. You may have a job that you'd like, that you're trying to take care of. Your own interests, your works, your hobbies. There are costs involved, not just in terms of time and pressure, but there are costs in terms of often giving up full-time work, for example, or paying for supplies or all kinds of things, running the car back and forth to the doctor's office. So there's some negatives, there's some challenges, I would call them. So there's normal aging, and then there are changes that are a result of disease, both physical and emotional, cognitive also. But many of us have taken on the responsibilities and the roles of providing care. I would suggest, before we go on and look at some of the nitty-gritty about what that looks like, providing care, I would suggest that you think about the fact that there are actually stages of caregiving. Denise Brown wrote about this, and I think it's incredibly important. For example, if you're a new care provider, you may feel overwhelmed. She would call that the expectant caregiver. Oh my goodness, I never did this before. What am I expected to do? What does my loved one need? What do I do if she's having trouble eating or showering or whatever? There's just lots of questions and lots of anxiety and just unfamiliarity with the role. We find, though, that we get our feet wet and we move along and we start to have a schedule and an understanding. We know where to go for information, and we'll talk a little more about that. And finally, we get to the entrenched caregiver. That's somebody who's got it. I've got this down. I know what I'm doing. Somebody comes to help me, I can tell them what they need to do. Over time, for many of the reasons we give care, a person's disease progresses. This is not the case for everybody. But if a person who has a dementia, for most dementias, there is a progressive path. And so for those folks, what we see, or someone who has an illness like cancer, there is often a progressive path. And in those cases, we see the caregiver moves on to sort of figuring out what's logical, understanding what can be done and what can't be done, and accepting when it has to be accepted that there is very little more to do except provide support and love. So that's an overview, and I hope that helps you a little bit if you just are, particularly in the beginning stage of, oh my heavens, what's this all about? It also can be very helpful to look at the specifics about the action plan. What do you need to do? And I'm going to go through this quickly, but you can ask questions. The nitty-gritty, by that I mean these are the things you just plain need to pay attention to. Number one, we need to look at the medical issues. We need to understand what's going on for the person who receives care. So that involves finding doctors who are comfortable talking about the illness and the issues and the future of that person in terms of the illness. We see this a lot with older adults. Some doctors are very comfortable and knowledgeable about aging issues, and some are not. So we need to find the right doctor that matches what our caree needs. That may involve medical exams, review of the medical history, and certainly a review of whatever medications a person needs, because they change over time. We also want to look at a financial checkup. Caregiving, as I suggested a few minutes ago, can be expensive. Even if you are an unpaid caregiver, there are, if someone is ill, lots of expenses that come up. And so you want to have perhaps a financial advisor if you decide you want help with this. But you want to look at things like, are my bills under control? What's the debt like? Can I pay it? What can I expect? What can I project will be needed later in terms of medical costs, maybe additional help, maybe even eventually moving into a residential community. Maybe hiring someone to give some of the care. Does the person have their finances in place? Do they know what they can afford and what they can be spending now? If you're the caregiver, you may have to take care of that, but it may be that your caree is able to participate in this conversation. That means also, and I'll just look at this, that there are a lot of support systems out there that you can enroll in. Health insurance. What do you have long-term? Does the person have long-term care insurance? Are they eligible for federal or state benefits? And of course, there are legal preparations, and these are incredibly important. It's very important for everyone to have their will in place and powers of attorney, even young people. Heaven forbid they should become incapacitated. But if a person does become incapacitated, they need healthcare powers of attorney and financial powers of attorney, durable powers of attorney, and all the other documents that are needed to, we should at least know where they are. Deeds and trusts and titles and things of that. So did you have a question about resources, about actions, things that you need to look at? You have an idea that there are differences in the kind of reasons that a person might have to receive care. And there's sort of a progression of how caregiving takes place over time. The next big piece of the transition tripod are resources and support. Because after you become familiar with the disease, after you talk to the doctor and you take care of legal and financial issues, and you settle into the role of being a caregiver, you still can't and shouldn't, in my opinion, do it all yourself. There are experts out there. There are resources out there that can help with caregiving. So let's look at some of those. Let's look at resources and support that are available. We've already talked about the fact that most people want to stay in their residences. Something like, depending on whose research you read, something around 75 to maybe as high as 90% of all people say they would like to stay home, no matter how old they get. About half of people realize that that may not be possible as they get older, but clear preference of most people to stay in place. There are all kinds of residential communities, however. I'm not going to speak about them in depth, but they vary in terms of the amount of assistance that's provided to the person. And someplace down the line, some of us have to look at choosing a residential community that home no longer becomes appropriate or possible for the person who needs care. If that's the case, then you look at independent living communities or assisted living communities or nursing homes. They are in all residential or what are called nowadays retirement communities, but they vary in how much support the staff gives to the person, and that depends on how much support the person needs. There are a lot of activities out in the community. I talk mostly about issues around aging, but so I'll focus on that now, but certainly there are community-based activities for all age people who receive care. There are daycare programs. That means a person goes during the day. They have recreational activities, social activities, sometimes medical activities, and clearly meals. It's a way to spend some time with other people and out of the house. For healthier people, sometimes senior recreation facilities, centers provide the kind of exercise and support that a person needs. That would be for a relatively healthy person, of course. And any number of other opportunities for people depending on their ability to function, both in terms of how well their brain's functioning and their body. To somebody who is, their brain's working just fine, but they may be, let's say, confined to a wheelchair, going to a lecture could be a wonderful opportunity to socialize and also stimulate our brains and have a change of pace. There's also something called respite care. That, and some of these daycare programs that I mentioned just a moment ago are actually just respite care. Respite care, by definition, means it's a chance for the person, the caree, and the care provider to have some time apart so that the caree sees other people and the care provider can take a breath, can do some things that he or she can't do while he's physically in the presence of the caree. Maybe need to run errands or just take a long bath and refresh themselves. Whatever it is, it can be just a few hours, it can be the whole day. It varies from respite care program to respite care program. I just said all of this, so I will move on. But too, what's really important, no matter what you're looking for, whether it's a residential community or you're looking for respite care or a community center that has activities, you always want to look for certain things. This has to be a safe experience that provides what it says it's going to provide. So you're going to look for cleanliness, for good lighting, for appropriate, believe it or not, appropriate heat and cooling. Sometimes that is a real issue that we have to pay attention to. What's the food like? Is it adequate? Is it well, is it well prepared in terms of safety issues and taste? What is the staff like? Do they look like they're engaged and interested and kind and caring? Or do they look like they're just putting in their time? There are ratings out there for many kinds of facilities, certainly for the residential facilities, for example, and you can access those just by going online. If you were going to only ask a few questions, this is what I would ask. This is what I would look for, and I would ask it out loud. Does the center or community have plans for coverage and absences? What do they do? Or will there be enough caregivers in place every day, every hour that your loved one is there? What are their emergency procedures? What if somebody falls or there's a fire alarm goes off? What do they do? How well prepared are they? And then ask questions. What would you do if? My mother sometimes doesn't eat. What do you do if she doesn't eat? That gives you a sense of how prepared people are and how much they're, really how much they're planning ahead. And of course, most importantly, is this an appropriate fit for your caree, for your loved one? It may be a perfectly lovely community, but not one that's appropriate for your loved one. It may be too fancy. It may be not fancy enough. It may emphasize reading and classical music, and your loved one really likes to listen to country music and have people sit and talk to them. I mean, does this work for your loved one? There are many, many sources of information and support. And I have only put down here a few examples. For example, if somebody has Alzheimer's disease or another related dementia, you can call the Alzheimer's Association, but there are many other organizations that provide care and support. In this area, in the Triad, Senior Resources of Guilford, Piedmont Triad Council of Governments, and I'm not going to read them all because it's just a lot of words, but take a look at it. And if you need these resources in writing, I'd be happy to send them to you. Remember also, there are individual professionals who provide care, whether it's a pediatrician for a child who needs care, or in the case of older adults, a geriatrician who specializes in the health of older adults. People like me who coach, who are, I don't like to use the word counsel, but are available to talk things through and help people plan and get information that they need. Geriatric care managers provide day-to-day support, make sure the medicines are taken, make sure the person's schedule works, make sure they get to the doctor, and so forth. Now, I know I've thrown a lot at you, so I'll just remind you where we've been. We've looked at who the caree is and who the care provider is, and some of the ways that those roles are carried out. We've talked about making some plans, particularly looking at the nitty-gritty. You know, are you prepared because you know what's wrong with the person in terms of their health, as well as knowing that they are prepared in terms of finances and legal issues and living arrangements and so forth. And we talked about resources and support, including programs that provide activities for older adults and communities that provide residential care for older adults. And those parallel other resources for younger people. But I don't want to leave this whole discussion without the third leg of the transition tripod, and that's emotions and needs. I think that's the part we don't talk about enough, because all of this involves feelings. So we're going to figure out what's happening, and we're going to make a schedule, and we're going to look for resources and support, but we're going to recognize that both the person who's being cared for and the person who's doing the caring have a lot of feelings and needs that are wrapped up in this relationship and in the illness or disability the person's experiencing, the caree is experiencing. So imagine just for a moment if you had to be cared for, if you're the care provider, but imagine what it would be like to be the caree. How would you feel about this? What would be most important to you about where you live, your own privacy, who's making decisions, communicating? What do you talk about? What do you share with other people? What do you want shared with other people? I think that this is a way to think about those questions. That when we provide care, we actually have a number of responsibilities and responses, and I call them the 4 C's because that's a convenient way to think about it. We have care responsibilities. That's the hands-on, making it happen stuff. Keeping the person able to meet their activities of daily living requirements, being sure they're fed and dressed and so forth. We also have the responsibility as care providers to collect information about what's out there, who else can provide support. We don't talk about it very much, but we have a responsibility for communication. We need to have conversations between the care provider and the caree so we're sure we're on the right track. Do we really know what the caree wants, what they think is best for them? Can we explain why we're doing what we're doing? How can we get some help, some support, some time off, sometimes by communicating with other family members or friends or the faith community, so that other people understand what's happening and can be part of a community of support. And then there's coping. Coping means I have some feelings, I know what I can do, but I also know that I can make plans to address the issues that are a little more difficult, and that I will take time to address how my caree and the care provider are feeling. Oh, take a breath. That was a lot of information. I'm checking my clock to be sure that we have time to talk at the end. So jot your questions down as you think of them in the chat area. This looks just like the first slide, doesn't it? But it's different. This tripod is what I gave as an example of what the caree needs. In order to care for somebody, we need information, action, resources, and support. And we need to address emotions and needs. Same thing, but this is for the care provider. The same thing applies. We can't ignore the care provider and still have a really strong care provider caree relationship. We can't provide good care if we don't take care of ourselves. So we'll do this much more briefly, but let's look at the information and actions that the caree needs, the caregiver needs them. First of all, there are things that the care provider needs to do. They need to take care of themselves. They need to look at their medical, financial, and legal situation. We really don't want, for example, the care provider to give everything he or she has financially, and when he or she stops being a care provider, to not be able to take care of herself. If that's at all possible, we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that the care provider is staying healthy, that he's seeing a doctor, taking medications appropriately, getting medical exams. And of course, then there is the need to figure out what one's role is. What are my responsibilities as a care provider? Which ones am I willing to take on? And which ones do I need to give to someone else, or try to find resources so that I can be sure that the caree receives what he needs, even if I'm not the one providing it. There are limits to what we can do, what we know how to do, what we have the time and strength to do. Caring for yourself also means having healthy habits for your body, for your brain, and sometimes that means talking to somebody about what's going on. I told you that's what I do a lot, is talk to people who are going through this experience, and they have questions and they need some support, and they need to be able to say, today was a great day, or today was a terrible day. Taking care of your health means exercising. You know how much you should exercise? 150 minutes of moderate exercise every week is the minimum according to the National Institutes of Health and the CDC. Want to have a good, healthy diet. We can't be successful if we get sick, and we stay healthier. Both our bodies and brains stay healthier when we eat a healthy diet. And if you don't know what's recommended, you might look at the Mediterranean diet. That's a wonderful model. It's full of healthy fruit and vegetables and some limited but healthy proteins, oils. But healthy oils, healthy fats are very important, and healthy carbohydrates, very important for our body. We don't want to eliminate those. We do not want to eliminate those. But we do want to minimize or eliminate things like deep fat fried foods and trans fats, saturated fats. Processed foods are often not a good choice, for example. Taking care of your entire body. I did mention this already. We need to make sure we have physicals, our vaccines are up to date, our medications are looked at. And we also want to take care of our brain health. And we can do that by using our brain, challenging our brain, learning something new, reading a good book, reading a lot of good books. Talk to the folks at McNary. They'll help you with that. But really, not just doing the routine of everyday responsibilities, but taking time to be healthy in body and brain. Now, we do have some negatives in here, that is things we want to probably avoid or minimize, and that is alcohol. You want to get control of stress the very best you can do that. Even if you're caregiving, you can take time to breathe deeply from time to time. You can do a half an hour of yoga or 15 minutes of meditation, or those things bring your stress level down. You want to avoid injuries to the head, injuries to the whole body, but injuries to the head really have a bad impact on brain health. And you want to try, I said try, but I mean you want to get good sleep. Sleep is a time when our bodies our cells cleanse themselves, heal themselves, produce new cells, even make memories solid in our brain. Things we're starting to learn become solid memories when we sleep. And recommendation there is 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Now on the tripod is information and action, which we talked about. We also want to talk about resource support. And I think that actually the most important part of the resources and support for the care provider is to make a plan, figure out what your schedule is, what you need to do, how you fit your other responsibilities in, and who you can call on to help you. And also, I say like a broken record, make a plan for staying healthy. There are lots of resources out there. The ones I showed you before were very specific, like the Alzheimer's Association or the Senior Resources of Guilford. But don't forget that there are people all around you who can lend you a friendly ear, can listen to how you're feeling, can provide professional information. Excuse me. There are support groups. They are incredibly helpful. Support groups are groups of people who have a common issue. I was in a support group when my mother had Alzheimer's disease. Everybody in that room understood what I was going through, and I understood what they were going through, and we could share information and caring. And there are just innumerable volunteers out there. Look at this list. Have you ever tapped any of these people who could help you on a short-term basis? For example, does your church offer meals or respite time? Excuse me. And this is just a repeat of what I said before, but putting it in the context of the caregiver instead of the caree. You need time out, and you need, and sometimes that comes by the caree being part of a respite care program. You can always call on the agencies that I mentioned before, and you can take advantage of those times out where you go to a lecture, you go to a concert, you do some activity in the community that's a fresh of breath air for you to change from your caregiving responsibility. So caregiving is a big responsibility and can be a very rewarding responsibility. But remember, and you may want to look the details of this up. I won't read the whole thing to you. But you also are entitled to experience the whole range of caregiving. So here's a shortened version of what's called the Caregiver Bill of Rights that was developed many years ago by Joe Horn, but still works, still speaks to us. It's a right to take, I have as a care provider, the right to take care of myself, to grow, to enjoy, to be angry and upset, to embrace the positive feelings and feel the gratitude of giving care. I'm going to end with this. It's called More Advice, and it really is just a little more advice. It's a poem by Joanne Seltzer. Have a daughter-to-mother talk. Ask her what she wants. If she doesn't know, ask her if she's happy. She will either say she doesn't know or she'll be silent. Tell her how much you love her. Promise you won't forsake her. That's a lovely message from Joanne as she gave care to her mother. I'm going to stop there because we may have questions. And so I want to take a moment to see what you're asking, what you're thinking, what your experiences are.